Red Eyes in the Darkness by Celestial Fan. Screams were the only thing that you could hear after the outbreak of the USG Ishimura. Loud and agonizing screams. Screams of those who have fallen victim to the beasts. Screams so horrible that you could hardly find words to describe them. Screams that passed through every corridor and every corner of the huge spaceship. But eventually, the screams came to an end, and the silence that had spread across the great ship was almost worse than the screams that were previously echoed through the dark corridors. Only a few had survived the attack, and those who still alive had been looking for hiding places to protect themselves from the monsters that have been attacking the ship's crew since then. Horrible creatures. Creatures that seemed to come from hell itself. If one fell into the claws of one of those monsters, he or she would die a slow, agonizing death. But there was something even worse than death out there. Many of the crew members who have fallen victim to the creatures have since then walked the ship as an undead monster, horribly distorted and barely recognizable as a human being anymore. They walk through the dark corridors, always in search of a new victim they would kill and eat. And the silence, which had first settled over the USG Ishimura, had given way to the cruel sounds of the creatures that were tirelessly tugging through the ship. Those who were still alive were paralyzed by their fear, or simply gave up all their hopes because they knew that there was no escape and no chance of survival for them. None of them had the courage to go to the control room of the ship and send a radio message out into the ship and call for help, and perhaps it was better that way. If help were to come, they would run into a death trap and become a victim to this outbreak as well. But there was one survivor on the ship who had the courage to make the long and admirable way to the control station. He crept as softly as he could through the gloomy corridors that stretched before him. Blood soaked the ground beneath his feet, and the way was lit only by the flickering of a neon tube. Its light showed him cruel things in the darkness that tried to hide from him, and he kept his eyes straight forward, for he knew he was going to lose a bit of his courage if he would look down to see the bloody remains of those whom he once called friends. Bullet holes and deep scratches on the wall witnessed a violent fight before all his friends had been torn into pieces. A shiver ran through his whole body, and he held a deep groan of one of those monsters in the darkness. His heart was pounding hard against his ribs. His sweaty fingers grasped the heavy pillars he held, the only weapon he could find, and his body trembled with fear. But courageously, he went on, always with the goal in front of his eyes. But the deeper he went into the ship, the darker it became. For when he reached the medical station, he found himself almost in complete darkness. There was a small emergency light flickering here and there, but otherwise he couldn't see anything at all. And maybe that was better, because his feet were bumping into something that laid on the floor, and he was sure it was the remains of people who had found death at the claws of the necromorphs here. As he turned to the next corridor, he found himself in complete darkness, and he almost trembled to turn around and go back to his hiding place. But he had to come this far that he could not give up yet. He went on, past old operation rooms, and when one of the neon tubes flickered in one of the rooms, their light exposed the horror that had been raging there, and the fear in him continued to increase. As he turned his head and looked to the left, his heart almost stopped beating in his chest, for he was no longer alone. Red eyes were watching him in the darkness, followed each step of his. But he didn't stop. He went on. But with every further step he did, another pillar of eyes appeared. watching him, and a growling rose in the darkness that surrounded him. A single tear ran down his cheek, testifying his greatest fear. In front of him was a door. Behind the door he could have seen another neon tube flickering, which showed him the way through a bloody passage. But he was not even given the chance to walk through the door, for as soon as he reached his hands over to press the door open, something jumped at him to the side and bit his arm. His loud screams of fear and pain almost led the other creatures to attack, and soon he lay to the ground cold and splattered of blood as the monsters began to eat him alive. At that moment, the USG Ishimura had claimed another victim, and it wouldn't be the last victim.